Gandhiji said, real Swaraj will come not by the acquisition of power by a few, but by the acquisition of all of the power to resist authority when it is abused. No authority is more liable to be abused than that wielded by someone in a custodial cell, where the rest of the world is barred to the prisoner. I thought there was a translation, Henry. Should I continue to speak?
Please continue to speak. That is at the end, after you finish.
Oh, I see. Okay. Have we achieved that Swaraj? Every police station in this country has a myriad of Jairaj and Benik. The irony is, it was on the soil of Madras, 150 years before we got formal Swaraj, not real Swaraj, formal Swaraj. In 1855, the East India Company set up the Madras Torture Commission. Of course, it was an imperial purpose that the East India Company had by targeting the natives and showing the Indians as incapable of lawful existence. But nevertheless, so many years ago, there was a recognition of torture as a crime. In 1860, the Indian Penal Code acquired sections 348, 337 to recognize custodial violence. In the early 19th century, as far back as 1912, the Lahore High Court sentenced police officers to 10 years or more of imprisonment on the count of culpable homicide when someone in their custody died. But what has happened down the line? Sometimes courts interfere, sometimes they don't interfere, sometimes they palm you off with some meager compensation, sometimes not even that. So what is it that started in the colonial era after 1947 has not become Swaraj for Jairaj, Benik, and thousands of Jairajas and Beniks? Will this alter if India ratifies the Convention Against Torture? Will the situation be better if India has a dedicated law on custodial torture? The answer, I'm afraid, is both yes and no. Certainly, ratification of the convention and passing of a dedicated law is important, at least for three reasons. One, because that would be the Indian polity's clear commitment to recognizing custodial torture as a crime. All these years, India's reluctance to ratify and pass a law is significant of its wanting somehow not to expose its law enforcement officers, either in their own right or as representatives to do the political master's bidding, somehow not to expose them to a process which they richly deserve. Whatever the dispensation, whether it was the Congress, whether it's the BJP, whether it's the DMK, whether it's the AIDMK, somewhere there is a reluctance to call the law enforcement officers to account, and the refusal to ratify still. In fact, India had even entered reservations before the UN on the point of compensation. So a declaration of a ratification and a passing of a legislation would be a declaration that the Indian polity stands firmly against custodial torture. In addition, India also ought to ratify the Convention on Enforced Disciplinary. So there is no two ways about it. The second reason, it is not only to recognize torture as a crime. A dedicated law would enable important procedural and evidentiary conditions to implement such a declaration, which are important because torture happens in a dark cell. So to establish it it would have to be enabled by certain just processes. I'm not for a minute saying no due process, but the due process would have to be tailored to this extraordinary situation where the crime happens in absolute darkness and the prisoner has no access. The third reason is, as I said before, judicial intervention has been there. Then you have D.K. Basu, you have Neelabati Behera, you have Joginder Singh, but the point is, it has not been uniform. So to establish a necessary consequence, because at that point of time, no matter what your D.K. Basu says, inside the cell, the man is helpless or the woman is helpless. So in order to, only way really you can prevent it is sure and certain consequences, and consequences commensurate with the order of that crime, where state officials turn killers and aggressors. So for all of these reasons, it is necessary that we ratify the convention and have an appropriate law. But while it is important, it is also important to recognize that torture happens not because there is absence of law. It happens in spite of whatever legal protections there are. Speaker after speaker has mentioned how the magistracy has looked the other way, where superior officers are not called to account, where the victim family runs from pillar to post. So additionally, we must recognize that while it is an important step, it is a baby step to have legislation. We must remember that it's not only the dispensation, but a vast number of people in this country believe torture to be indispensable to crime prevention. So there has to be a public campaign against this mindset. We will have to ensure that there is command responsibility, which is factored, your statement also says that, factored into the system. So it is not just, there is not just the odd sub-inspector who eventually may get caught after years and years of struggle, but the superior officers must know that there will be consequences. The magistracy is the most important thing because that is the first and immediate and often the only point of interaction that the poor and the marginalized have with the law. That magistracy has to be sensitized, it has to be policed, as Henry said. And the other thing we must do is relentlessly document what the medical officer did, what the magistrate did, in as many cases as possible, so that it comes into public light, which is itself, that scrutiny itself may go some way. Of course, if somebody has defaulted, if they have not performed their onerous responsibilities to preserve life, liberty, and limb, then other consequences ought to follow. But the first thing is scrutiny, because that equally happens in darkness. The third thing is, we can't just have a law which puts the entire burden on the victim. The victim was already beaten and gone in spirit, his family is gone in spirit. So we have to devise a system where there is a self-generating mechanism of justice beginning from the magistrate's point. And for this, there must be real-time access that some watchdog body has to the CCTV. We had asked for it, that has not yet been incorporated, but that real-time access is essential so that somebody can go to that watchdog body and say, look, my relative, my cousin, my sister, my brother is in that custody and we are anxious. They may themselves not be given that access, but somebody has to be given that access. And for this, friends, I say, I've told all the law schools, please don't send your interns only to fancy law offices, to the Supreme Court and the High Court. Send it, because magistrates also have to be taught what their duties are. Oftentimes, they do not know even what their duties are. So, to operationalize such a right, I would say that it is important. First point of our concentration, aside from the police station, is the magistracy. As I said, the NHRC has turned custodial torture into something where there's a chancy award of compensation. Too little, too late. But compensation is really not a compensation, is what monetary compensation is nothing, because reparation means non-recurrence. So reparation is a package to ensure action against the errant officials, to ensure action against their superiors who may not have known. But if they have known, of course, they're complicit in the crime. But if they have not known, even then, that they are responsible for ensuring a system where this does not happen. So we have to not only campaign for legislation, but we have to campaign for the operationalization of this at many levels, at the level of a public campaign where people are talked to. We talk to people and say, look, this is not indispensable to law enforcement. Because unless we change that mindset somewhere or the other from the populace to the political masters, all these statements against torture would just seem to them as pious declarations which are really not of any practical use. So I have found this mindset at various points, which is why the magistracy looks the other way, which is why the doctors look the other way, aside from, of course, complicity with power. So we have to build this campaign among the people aside from legislation, work with the magistracy right up, document as many cases as possible, and campaign for real-time access for some watchdog body. I think I'm already, because the constitutional and the statutory duties, which Henry says has happened in this case, happened in many cases. I have documented some of them in my book. In what manner do you, because everybody, you see, anything that depends purely on litigation is not a solution, particularly given the kind of people who face custodial torture. It is a necessary but not a sufficient condition. Everybody has spoken at length about actual experiences. I would not like to overshoot my time. I will end before handing over the document to Ms. Kanimoi with the request, ma'am, that you will carry this fight to administrative, political, and parliamentary and legislative realms where often most others are unable to reach. Before releasing this document and handing it over to Ms. Kanimoi, I would like to place on record my admiration for People's Watch, for Henry Tiffin, for his associates, for tirelessly and relentlessly fighting this issue, case after case that comes to their notice, to fight it till the end. That tirelessness is something I admire deeply. I would like to emulate it, and I sincerely pledge my support to this very, very important issue. It's not, to call it important is not sufficient. It's a burning issue. There are two things about custodial torture, however, that persist in spite of laws. One is the invisibility, and second is the impunity. Both of them are features of perhaps the same thing. We must recognize that what happens within the darkness of a cell will require various strategies tailored to meet it, tailored to prevent it in future, tailored to ensure there are consequences, whatever our laws, for those hours, nobody is able to reach the walls. So our strategies will have to pierce this veil of invisibility and the consequent impunity. And I am there in this fight with People's Watch, with the Satankulam group, and with whoever else wants to fight the good fight. And Ma'am Kanimoi, may I now present the declaration, which I can only do virtually, but I hope that your campaign will go far beyond the virtual. Ma'am, thank you so much for giving me the privilege of joining in this fight. And my mother gives this cause all her blessings. She's an old freedom fighter. She's fought for human rights in her time. And she is with us, she says, all through the way. Thank you so much.
Show her face.